Now we have a question which says, a man eats a piece of brown bread. In his digestive system, the starch in the bread is chemically digested to maltose and then to glucose. Describe where and how this digestion takes place as the bread travels through his digestive system. Brown bread contains both starch and fiber, so this question is about how these two components are processed in the digestive system. To answer this, we need to describe which enzymes are involved in breaking down starch, where those enzymes act in the digestive system, and what each enzyme breaks the molecules into. The key enzymes are amylase, which breaks starch into maltose, and maltase, which breaks maltose into glucose. These processes take place in the mouth and in the small intestine, particularly in the duodenum and ileum. And the answer is, amylase acts on starch and breaks it down into maltose. This occurs in the mouth and in the small intestine, particularly in the duodenum. Maltase then acts on maltose and breaks it down into glucose. Maltase is active in the small intestine, including the duodenum and ileum. Now we have another question which says, describe what happens to the fiber as it passes through his digestive system. This question is about fiber, which is not digestible by the enzymes in the human digestive system. So we simply need to say that it is not broken down and passes out of the body unchanged. So, we will write, fiber is not digested or broken down by enzymes. It passes through the digestive system and is egested from the anus in the feces. Now we have part B of the question, which says, glucose passes from the digestive system into the blood by diffusion and active transport. Give 2 ways in which active transport is different from diffusion. This is a comparison question. We must highlight 2 main points, that active transport requires energy while diffusion does not, and that active transport can move substances against the concentration gradient, while diffusion only happens from a region of high to low concentration. So we will write, first, active transport requires energy, while diffusion does not. And, active transport can move substances against the concentration gradient, but diffusion only occurs from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Now we have part C, which says, there is already glucose in the blood when the starch is eaten. Explain how figure 2.1 shows this. We're asked how we know that glucose is already present in the blood before eating starch. To find this, we look carefully at the graph in figure 2.1. If the line on the graph starts above 0 on the y-axis at time 0, it means that some glucose was already in the blood before the starch was consumed. So, we will write, the graph line does not start at the origin, it starts partway up the y-axis. Next part says, both graph lines show an initial increase in blood glucose concentration followed by a decrease. Suggest 2 reasons why the blood glucose concentrations decrease. In this question, we need to explain why blood glucose levels drop after they rise. 2 main biological processes are responsible for this. First, the glucose is used by body cells in respiration to produce energy. Second, insulin from the pancreas causes glucose to be converted into glycogen for storage in the liver and muscles. So we will simply write, glucose is used in respiration to release energy, and glucose is converted to glycogen after insulin is released. Then, use information from figure 2.1 to suggest which type of starch is healthier to have in the diet. Give a reason for your answer. Here we must look at how blood glucose changes for both types of starch shown on the graph. Slowly digested starch gives a gentle rise and fall in glucose levels, while quickly digested starch causes a sharp spike. The slower change is healthier because it keeps blood sugar levels more stable, reducing the need for excess insulin and lowering the risk of type 2 diabetes. So, we will write, slowly digested starch is healthier because it causes less variation in blood glucose concentration, so the pancreas doesn't need to produce as much insulin. Then we have D part which says, scientists want to produce a new wheat variety with an increased fiber content. Describe 2 methods they could use to do this. This question moves into biotechnology and selective breeding. There are 2 main ways scientists can increase fiber content in wheat. The first is selective breeding, where plants with naturally higher fiber content are chosen and bred repeatedly over generations. The second is genetic modification, where genes that control fiber production are altered or inserted to increase the fiber level in the new variety. So we will write, use artificial selection by choosing plants with the highest fiber content and breeding them over several generations. And also, use genetic modification to insert or alter a gene so that the plant produces more fiber. Then, we'll move to the next question. Remember to use the references above for all the necessary information. So, this question asks us to state one other cause of anemia. Anemia occurs when there are too few red blood cells or too little hemoglobin, meaning less oxygen can be carried around the body. One common cause is iron deficiency, since iron is essential for making hemoglobin. Another possible cause is blood loss, for example through injury or menstruation, which reduces the number of red blood cells. So, we will simply write, iron deficiency or heavy loss of blood, such as through injury or menstruation. Part C states, lipase is also produced by the human body, and they are asking you to explain why it is produced and how its function is different from the function of bile. In this question, we're being asked 2 things. First, why lipase is produced, and second, how its function differs from that of bile. To answer, we need to recall that lipase is an enzyme that breaks down fats, lipids, into fatty acids and glycerol. In contrast, bile is not an enzyme, it helps in fat digestion by emulsifying fats, which means breaking large fat droplets into smaller ones to increase surface area. Bile also helps by neutralizing stomach acid, providing the best pH for enzymes like lipase to work effectively. So, we will write, lipase is produced to digest lipids by breaking them down into fatty acids and glycerol. Its function is different from bile because bile does not digest fats but emulsifies them, increasing their surface area for lipase to act on. Bile also neutralizes acidic food from the stomach, providing the optimum pH for lipase to work. Now coming back to MCQs, this question says, a healthy person eats a meal containing carbohydrates. 2 hours later, which structure will contain a liquid with an increased concentration of glucose? To answer this, we need to think about what happens after carbohydrates are digested. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, which is then absorbed from the small intestine into the blood. The blood carrying absorbed nutrients from the intestine goes through a special vessel called the hepatic portal vein, which takes glucose directly to the liver for processing and storage. The other options don't fit. The colon mainly absorbs water, the renal artery carries blood to the kidneys, and the ureter carries urine, not glucose. Therefore, option B is the correct answer. Hepatic portal vein carries glucose-rich blood from the small intestine to the liver after carbohydrate digestion. Now coming on to the next MCQ, which is based on the human digestive system. The diagram shows some parts of the human digestive system labeled P, Q, R, and S. Which row identifies the main function of each of the labeled parts. To solve this, we need to recall the main stages of digestion in the correct order. It all begins with ingestion, simply the act of taking food into the mouth. From there, the process shifts to digestion, where the body gets to work, breaking that food down, chemically and mechanically, into simpler substances it can actually use. Next is a critical phase, absorption. This is when those simple, digested nutrients pass from the small intestine into the bloodstream, ready to be distributed throughout the body. Finally, any leftover material, the food the body couldn't use, moves to the final stage, digestion, which is the removal of that undigested waste from the body through the anus. This completes the entire digestive cycle. So, based on this information we know that option D is the correct answer.